only for communication, but also for transmitting epistemic resources, way of living and knowing. Okay, this is something that we've come up with a number of recommendations after we met in what you see there, which is a global justice for indigenous language. It was a symposium that happened in 2018 at Columbia University. People from the permanent forum participated also, and you're going to see that I have here I have placed some of the recommendations that we have made, because it's not, at this point you probably know that the languages are dying, no? And the languages that are dying are not any languages, are our languages, not only in the Americas, but also all over the world. The languages of the poor, the languages of the excluded, the languages of the indigenous people, those are the languages that are falling tremendously in numbers, no? Okay, what is a language? I'm looking for this presentation that I'm doing, I'm looking at language as a human factor. Okay, number two, the efforts to safeguard languages at risk are many times associated to the languages per se. But what I propose here is that these efforts will be associated and directed to safeguard the peaceful existence of the speakers of those languages. Okay? We support languages, but above all, we should support the communities of speakers. And in here, what I am trying to build is, I'm beginning to build the idea that sometimes our languages have been studied by people that are interested in the languages, but not in the communities that speak them. Okay, so you have the human being, they come, they extract the language, and they despise the speakers. That's really, that can continue happen. It's something that we cannot allow to happen anymore. So the last bullet here is something that I have been sort of spreading in my work as a language activist, which is respect for the languages and respect for those who speak these languages. Next. Again, I am going to be presenting, I'll start talking about, I have created, my activism has been developing over the last 5 years that I have been living in Lima again in Peru through Facebook. And I created a group that you see here now that says Language Rights, Derechos Lingüísticos, Lenguas en Riesgo. And you're going to see that I have integrated that, and I work with that a lot in developing my language activism. The dignity and equality of all languages, okay? Including the languages that act as colonial languages. Because the languages reflect the powers that are behind them, and really the powers that are behind them are the ones who are acting as colonials, okay? This is another seal that I created, protect languages and protect peoples. I'm going to start, how do I start to develop my activism? This is kind of my own story here. In the year 2009, I was working at NYU, and I met these two congresswomen who, for the first time, had been elected by popular vote to the Peruvian Congress. One of them is Honorable Hilaria Supa, the one that you see here, over there. Hilaria never went to school, and she learned how to read passing 20 years old. She is completely from the community, a monolingual Quechua speaker. Imagine what her life has been and how interesting it was that she was elected to Peruvian Congress. The next one here is Maria Sumire, also a Quechua speaker from another area of Cusco, both of them representing a state that was, a region that was largely populated by a lot of Quechua speakers. No? And they came to me and told me that they wanted to have the legislation on language preservation and protection and revitalization. They needed for it to be approved. And I went from New York to Lima, and I started a campaign so that the law would be approved. We worked very hard on it. Here we are. This is one of the many presentations that we did. I called many people around the world, including Noam Chomsky, who sent us a letter of support. We were trying to create a we were trying to create a situation of pressure for the Peruvian Congress so that they would approve the legislation, no? Here is Fernand Barren. He's an expert on language rights around the world. That's Hilaria and myself. So I moved to Lima to work on this. I stayed there like 6 months. And here's Hilaria and in Cusco with Fernand. I think it was the first time for many of the speakers that were able to get to know experts from the world. He's a French-Canadian lawyer. And he actually supported the fact that they had the right to speak their language. And also they had the right to be helped in their language in terms of when they would go to court or when they would go to receive health services. And that time we held, this was in 2009, July 2009 more or less. We held an open audience so that people would come and tell us, in person, stories about how they felt because they never get through with speaking Quechua, no? And first we were translating from Spanish to English and then sometimes to Quechua. And then at some point one professor from the University of Cusco said, no, I will translate directly from Quechua to English. And there were so many people that were raising their hands that we had to stay until 3 a.m. listening to the stories. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. So he actually came back again and he helped us to talk to many people. We lobbied tremendously and the legislation was approved in 2010, 2011. It is being implemented right now, but it's not necessarily doing good because the state has taken over now. For example, she was the person who helped the legislation to be, taken forward and then approved. She's not included in the Office of Indigenous Languages now. She has not been called. Everything is in the hands of the states who are non-indigenous linguists. Okay, so I'll show you later because I have a video clip of when she took the oath. She took the oath in Quechua, and they were forcing her to do it in Spanish. And it was a complete situation for like 5 to 10 minutes. I have the video. The way that we look at this, the sociolinguists, is what is the meaning and theoretical considerations on looking at languages at risk. This is kind of the kind of terminology that we use. First, we look at the fact that languages relate in asymmetrical relationships. Okay, some languages are assigned this perception that they are not even languages many times. One language is superior than other language. I'm sure you can relate to that tremendously. You are being treated differently because you don't speak the language. You are somehow suspected of being, sometimes not even intelligent, less good looking. There are so many studies on this. This is a sociolinguistic terminology. Then there is an inequality and ultimately an erasure. No? Your language is not equal to mine, so you should put it aside and ultimately it has to be erased. Okay, so languages have been subject to erasure in the same way. So many of our lives and as peoples have been erased. And remember when Europeans came to this country, the first thing they did was to baptize everything, like if there was nothing here, and there goes the names. Okay. Then comes the policies of languages termination. Historically, I think you can look at this, you're probably aware of this, that the idea was to exterminate, and in this country it has been terrible, exterminate the person and turning them into a white person, and one of the first things that would go is language. No? And then other term that I use a lot is linguistic genocide, which was created by Tove Skudnov-Kangas. Tove is actually a very good friend of Leanne Hinton. Okay, and then I don't need explanation to linguistic genocide. What they're doing, even this minute with our languages, to be able to expose them to linguistic genocide. The next one is language prejudice. Okay, this is when people say, oh, this person doesn't even speak English well. This person doesn't even speak Spanish well. So you have to constantly be proving yourself and refining the way you speak to be able to prove yourself to be intelligent at the same level. Next one is language hierarchies. The next one is linguistic violence. Okay, when you are completely put aside, or there are campaigns in which linguistic violence is happening all the time. Next one is linguistic discrimination, which comes in an institutionalized form or outside of formal institutions. And the last one that we also use is linguicism. Anyone heard linguicism? There is racism, there is linguicism. That's a term that was also carved by Tove Skudnov-Kangas. Okay. She's very important to me. She's a very person that is very much. How do we respond to all of this? Bogan proposed studying the Irish language. That language is a form of resistance. Okay, and language is resistance also. And then some of the terminology that was created by Joshua Fishman is fundamental to understand issues of power and issues of language declining and language being lost, languages being lost. One is language shift. Language shift means when the people in the community have been so pressed to let go of their language that they start to shift. Okay, so when we talk about language revitalization, what we're saying is that we have to reverse. The reversing of language shift is revitalization. Okay, then you have probably heard about intergenerational transmission. Anyone here? That's also something that is very common. You know, if you don't create new speakers, it doesn't matter how much money you're getting, how much you're praising and you're saying, oh, you need to speak your language. If you don't have new speakers, meaning children, you're not going anywhere. Okay, so the transmission is so important. It's so important that parents teach their children, and that there would always be a tremendous amount of small children learning the language. Okay? In different parts of the world, that happens. For example, let me give you an example. Right now, if you go to the Amazon, to some of the Awahun communities, it's one of the tribes in the Amazon, you would see a lot of children who are being born speaking Awahun. But their life is really so segregated. They are so poor. So it's not just that, but to create the conditions so that there would be respect for all of that, it's important. Okay. Next, language loss. The term language loss was also something that was created by Fishman in the series of paradigms that are used by him. The next one is language maintenance. We need to maintain the languages, but it's not easy. Okay, it's not easy. And this is the one that I use a lot. It's called language loyalty. Some communities develop language loyalty, some don't. Some let go for different reasons, and some other people become advocates like myself. You know, loyalty is something that is something that is an extraordinary feeling, and I think that's why we resist so much. We do it overtly, or we do it in a hidden way, but I think language is always there. Showing some of us resist more, but it's not, the other ones didn't let go because they wanted, but because of the tremendous pressure of linguistic violence. Okay? Next come these two ones that I am placing them that I think are also important terms. One is language revitalization, which is the one that is used more widely, and the other one is language revival. Language, these are some of the people that you might want to take a look. Fishman, Grenoble, Sunala, Superman, Crystal, Dorian. These are some of the people that need to be looked upon in their work. But this is, the entire field of language revitalization and language revival is developing day by day. Okay, but some of the things that I do respond to this frame, this paradigm. Next. Okay. So this is the group that I created in year 2000, I think it was 2013 more or less. I had just moved back to Lima. I had been participating in other groups of sociolinguists, and everyone was so academic and so, so purist into what we were proposing. And I was thinking myself, I know so many people who speak the language, different languages. They are not linguists, they are not teachers, they are housewives, they work in the garden, taking care of, someone that's working in a kitchen, just regular people, and they have no place to be able to say what they want to say. Why do we always have to go to the filter of the academics telling us what is a language, how do you speak? And so I created this group to be able to provide that opportunity to a lot of people that I was getting to know in Peru, but needed a place to say something. Okay. Okay. So this is one of the first posters that were created by some kids that are dancers. I know this dance. This is Maestro Danza Picaflor. He is like, I would say, it's like they come in from the tradition of the ghost dancers. You have the ghost dance here, we have Taquionco over there. So these are the scissors dancers. And as you see, the first thing that come up, Quechua es resistencia. Okay, so what you're going to see that I will be presenting is a lot of the interaction that I've had through the group, and that's come up. This came up from someone that is in the Mohawk territory. They told me, why don't we do this? So I decided to do this one. And this has come up for 2019. It says, for the silence languages, for the languages that are pressured towards decline. 2019 Year of Language Justice. This is another one that I created that has been very popular. It says, I'm going to translate, for all the silence language, for the language that are pressed towards decline, so that the new generations will inherit the linguistic patrimony of their ancestors because it is of justice. Okay? These are some of the ones that are coming in form of poetry in Cusco. There are a number of speakers who decided to begin to write on the walls as a graffiti. And of course, the municipality would go and erase it, so we've had a lot of fight for this. But I'm working with them a lot. They are called poetic action. Next, this is more or less what I began to develop in 2015, around 2015. It was language rights advocacy, expanding the consciousness on language rights. I don't know how that would be looked upon from the situation of North American, communities, the tribal governments, but actually in Latin America, people